Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room on this Thursday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us today. Some breaking news coming out of the White House as President Trump prepares to announce his plans to move forward on the 2020 census. We'll get to that first in a moment. It was an ABC News exclusive by our White House team. We also are back on the southern border today, a live report from Texas. We also interview Minnesota Senator Tina Smith, who's talking about deportations of families already underway in her state. We'll also hit the campaign trail this afternoon where the candidates are out in force, but I do want to bring in our Alex Mallon, our Justice Department producer, White House reporter as well, who helped break this news. Alex, tell us what this means. The president is about to announce in a short time that he is giving up on his plan to get a citizenship question on the census, but he's going to pursue a different avenue.
Yeah, so I don't think that we're going to hear the president say, I'm giving up here, but what sources told both Catherine Faulders and myself is that the president is going to announce that he's not going to move forward with the legal fight that the administration is waging in 3 separate states to try and add the citizenship question to the 2020 census. Instead, he's expected to announce that the Commerce Department, he's directing the Commerce Department to try and find that data, that citizenship data, through other means. Now, what that means, it's really not clear right now. The Commerce Department just does not have appropriations, money to send out a separate citizenship question to every American household. So it's unclear whether they'll get that information possibly from internal government data. But the president, I think, will go out there and say that he's declaring victory. We're going to find a way to get this question answered, but it's not going to be through that means that he previously promised he would get it.
This is a huge development for people who have been following the census story. Just to remind people, the census, Alex, you know this, is so important. It's asked every 10 years how many people live in the United States. It's used to determine apportionment of seats in Congress, also the electoral votes of each state, of course, important for presidential elections, and the distribution of billions of dollars of federal tax funds are all based on where people live in the United States. And so it's so important to get an accurate count. We know this is coming up, and there had been a big fight over the impact that a citizenship question could have on that count. One thing that's interesting, Alex, is that if the administration does get citizenship data through some other means, big question is, will that still be relevant to redistricting in a lot of these different states? What do we know about that right now?
I think they're going to have to try and clarify that, because bottom line, exactly what you said, that congressional district drawing, that federal funding that goes to these communities is all dictated by data that comes straight from the census. So unless they try and incorporate that data into the numbers that they end up getting from the 2020 census, I just don't see how they're going to be able to do that. But really what those immigration advocates and those other civil rights advocates that brought this suit have said is they're worried that this has already had a chilling effect, because the point that they made in court was that this question was added by the administration to try and intimidate non-citizens in these communities from signing or sending the census forms back. They say, those advocates say, that this has already had that effect, that because of all this news coverage that's been generated around the administration using the census to ask the question, that those people will not do it because they're afraid that that the administration will find a way to use the data that they send back to them against them.
The Census Bureau certainly has a lot of work to do now to rebuild people's trust in the census. I want to bring in 2 stakeholders in this census fight, Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose, California, and Kelly Percival. She's with the Brennan Center for Justice, has studied this issue. Mr. Mayor, welcome back to the briefing room. I want to start with you and get your reaction to this administration decision to step back from the fight to get the citizenship question on the short form official census document. Big victory for advocates like you?
Well, it is. We filed a lawsuit a year ago and won at the district court level. And obviously, we've all been waiting to understand what outrageous thing might come from this administration next. I'm certainly thrilled to hear that this administration recognizes that the Supreme Court has the final word in interpreting what the Constitution requires. And I think it's a wise decision for them to step back.
And remind our viewers what's at stake in communities like yours, even at the local level, from the census count and an accurate census count. What do you need those data for?
Well, for a large, diverse city like San Jose, about 1.1 million people, every undercounted person is equivalent to about $2,000 annually in federal education spending, health spending, housing spending, and across the many needs we have in our city. And so over the course of a decade, which is how long the census impacts these allocation decisions, that's hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's a big impact, obviously, and a lot of those funds are needed to care for those residents and operate public services. Kelly Percival, you have argued at the Brenner Center for Justice that the government now has a huge task in front of it after the smoke clears from this legal battle to convince people that the census is a nonpartisan document and people need to participate in it.
Absolutely. The census is not supposed to be partisan in any way. It really affects every person in the country. It doesn't matter whether you're right or left. It's important, as the previous speaker was saying, for $900 billion in federal funding are divvied up every single year based on these numbers. So the administration really needs to start to repair the damage that it's done by just even proposing this question and fighting for it so hard. They've only increased fears that we know were already in existence before the citizenship question came on the horizon. People were already afraid of the federal government, but now they're even more so. And so when you get a form in the mail from the federal government saying, please give us this information about yourselves, there's a lot of people out there who aren't going to be filling out that form, and they're going to be even less inclined to open the door when a federal enumerator comes and knocks on it.
And we should remind everybody that federal law, of course, does state that the Census Bureau can't use any of that data they gather for any purpose other than statistics. Of course, it's the perception and the fear that can matter in so many cases. Mr. Mayor, back to you. What have you heard from your residents and your constituents about this? Are people talking about it in San Jose? Is there an awareness that this fight is going on and concern about it?
Well, there's certainly an awareness among nonprofit organizations, churches, those organizations that are most deeply engaged in serving our community. And really, the previous speaker was right. A lot of damage has been done already. We've got ICE raids that have been announced in many cities throughout the country this weekend. In a city like San Jose, where we've got perhaps 400,000 people who were born in a foreign country who now live in our city, and about 90,000 of them may be undocumented. That is a huge amount of fear that builds up with any interaction with the federal government. And simply saying, well, federal law says we won't use this against you isn't much solace.
All right, Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose, California, great to have you with you. Instant reaction to this big development. Thank you, sir. And Kelly Percival with the Brennan Center of Justice. Appreciate your analysis and expertise. As always, Alex Mallon, thanks for breaking the news. Much more at abcnews.com and on the ABC News app. Coming up here on World News Tonight with David Muir as well. Turning now to the crisis on the southern border and the Trump administration's announced crackdown on undocumented immigrant families in this country. You just heard some of our guests talk about it. The New York Times reported this morning. Take a look that nationwide raids to arrest thousands of undocumented families are scheduled to begin this weekend. This after President Trump ordered the operation to deport millions of people. He postponed it a couple weeks ago because of some resistance from within the agency. We're also learning today that family deportations are already underway in some parts of the country, far from the border, including in places like Minnesota. Today, one Catholic church in a suburb of Minneapolis received a message from their pastor which illustrated this anecdote. Take a look. This is from Father Mike Byron of the Catholic community Pax Christi. He writes his parishioners, "I was stunned to learn that 3 of our parishioners were abruptly picked up by agents of our government, ICE, last week, and the couple is being deported to Mexico immediately. These are members of the Pax Christi community. None of them are criminals. All of them were on their way to work when ICE swept in." He goes on to say that 4 generations of their family have now been traumatized and separated by this single event. The inhumaneness of the whole episode is unspeakable, and yet somebody has to speak of it. I do not hear outrage from the vast majority of Christian public leaders, Catholic or otherwise, about what's happening to actual human beings and families, even though the facts are quite public. We spoke with Father Byron a short time ago. He said this family had been in the parish for more than 22 years in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota Senator Tina Smith recently joined us here in the briefing room to talk about this case and the threat of deportations all across the country, including her state.
Calling off a similar effort several weeks ago, they are now telling us again this Sunday that they are planning on raids in 10 cities across the United States. And I just think about what this means to families. This isn't this is going to affect families across the board. I'm thinking about a story in Minnesota for several years ago where ICE agents rounded up 2 adults and their children who were American citizens were left at home. An 8-year-old and a 2-year-old were left to take care of themselves for 7 days before their grandmother can get here. I am so concerned that this kind of separating of children from their parents is going to happen again on Sunday right here in our country. It is just, I think it's untenable.
And already some reports that it's happening, still ongoing, including in Minnesota. I think a lot of people might be surprised that these sorts of raids are taking place so far from the border. A lot of your peers have used the spotlight and media attention to try to pressure the administration away from some of these moves. What can you do? What have you done behind the scenes? Have you had any conversations with the administration or your colleagues on taking action?
Well, I haven't had any conversations with the administration directly, but I know many of us are talking about what a bad idea this is. And, you know, let's be clear, our country needs comprehensive immigration reform. We need to have secure borders. But this kind of approach, which seems designed to put fear and to intimidate people on Sunday, I mean, the ICE won't even commit to not arresting people at their churches this Sunday. I think that America is going to look at this and look at the families that are ripped apart by this and be really upset.
We had the ICE director here on the show a week or so ago, Mark Morgan. He told us pretty clearly that this is about law and order. It's about enforcing the law. It's about fairness in this country. He says a lot of these families have deportation orders outstanding. It's illegal that they're here. Isn't he right? What do you say to that this is actually what the law says?
What I say is that we do need to have an immigration system that works. One thing that we could do is we could expand the number of immigration judges at the border so that people aren't left in, children aren't left in detention cells for days and days and days and sometimes longer while they're waiting for the immigration legal system as it is supposed to work to play out. You know, I've had a chance to visit the border and I've seen children separated from their parents and moms and kids in what can only be described as prisons while they are awaiting the United States immigration system to provide them with sort of an avenue for seeking asylum. I think it's important for us to realize that these are individuals, many of these are individuals who are seeking asylum in this country, and that is what our law allows. But we need to live up to the promise of our laws.
You have been down there recently, also voted in support of that border aid package, humanitarian aid package a week or so ago. Do you think we've turned a corner with this crisis now that the migrant numbers are coming down, more money is flowing down there?
Well, I hope that the additional resources that the Senate and the House passed resoundingly, bipartisan package, that those additional resources will get to the border immediately to provide basic humanitarian care to families, especially children who are literally running for their lives and coming to the United States for help. Now, don't get me wrong. We need a comprehensive immigration system, including border security, but it all needs to work together.
And our thanks again to Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota for that. For more on this now, I want to bring in 2 guests. Alejandra Hernandez Chavez. She is an immigrant advocate with Isaiah, Minnesota, a group that works with faith communities there. She is also formerly an undocumented immigrant. And our Quinn Owen, our immigration reporter, he is still down on the border in Texas, in Laredo, Texas, joins us by phone. We'll get to Quinn in a second. But Alejandra, thanks for joining us. Want to start with you and want to get your reaction to this story that just popped in the last day or so out of that community in Eden Prairie, that Catholic church we told our viewers about at the top of this segment. Family in the country for 22 years, seemingly law-abiding, faithful people, and in the swoop of an afternoon, they were detained and are to be deported. What can be done about that?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, first off. Very sad story, but in the world that we live in the current immigration policy that we have in this country, I can't say that it's something that's surprising, especially with the immigration raids and the attacks that our current president has announced recently on folks who could perhaps have an order of deportation for reasons that are really carried out through just having an unjust immigration system, not necessarily because folks have done anything that would be considered breaking the law or anything that would be normally heavily enforced.
And when you see in the New York Times, as you did this morning, these reports, again, we saw it a couple weeks ago as well, that there is some coming mass deportation operation underway targeting families, according to the paper. The Trump administration, we know, has wanted to do this. What impact does that have in immigrant communities, even in places like Minnesota?
It has great impact. There's a lot of folks who will not go to work, who will not go to church, who won't let their children go to school because they live in a constant fear that they don't know if they will be taken at any moment. They also don't know, I think it was a clear point that was made through the Trump administration that they are looking for folks who have orders of deportation, but will take anyone who is on scene. So you don't feel safe in any spaces because even if it's not you who has the order, who they're coming for, if you are in a close proximity to perhaps someone you know or a family member, it could also be you. It could also be your family. So people live.
Yeah, and you have some personal experience with that. Tell us a little bit about your story as someone who was undocumented for a period of time and now has legal status.
Yeah, so I was able to become a permanent resident and then a citizen back in 2010, but I was here for about a decade as an undocumented individual. And I also want to uplift that for folks who don't acknowledge that we have an unjust immigration system. It took me about a decade to gain any status in this country. Would have taken a lot longer if it wasn't for situations in my family. There's a very popular tweet going around right now about a family who after 23 years received a letter that can finally apply for another family member who has now passed away. So it is a difficult system to work with that leaves people hanging for decades upon decades.
It sure is, and there does seem to be an agreement that something needs to be done. There needs to be some reforms made. Alejandra Hernandez-Chavez, an advocate with Isaiah, Minnesota, thanks so much for sharing your story. Alejandra, appreciate you, and I want to go now to Quinn Owen, who is our immigration reporter still down on the border in Texas. Quinn, you've been talking to folks down there during your road trip about all of this and the administration's efforts specifically with respect to asylum seekers. A lot of concern there about the rush to send people back to Mexico if they may have legitimate claims for asylum.
That's right, Devin. A lot of the lawyers I've talked to along the border here are very concerned about the expansion of the administration's migrant protection protocols, as they call them, also known as the Remain in Mexico policy. I'm standing right at the Laredo International Bridge here, where people cross over to Mexico every day. But starting this week, asylum seekers looking for refuge in the United States are going to be forced across that bridge to wait in Mexico for the duration of their asylum claims to process through immigration court.
And you spoke to one attorney, I believe, who is dealing with a lot of these asylum seekers and says this poses some pretty serious challenges. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this attorney, we're exploring the issue of family separations at the border of all varieties, even after the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy ended. Now, President Obama did test the limits of legal immigration as well, but those policies didn't hit the same legal roadblock, except when it came to detaining migrant families with children together. And this is what our immigration attorney that I spoke with had to say about it.
Obama is the one who started family detention and expanded family detention. I was working a lot in Artesia, which was one of the first family detention centers. It was horrific. Despite all of that, all of this pales in comparison to what we're seeing right now. Family separation was absolutely, unequivocally not an Obama administration policy.
So it did start under Obama, but the lawyer there, Quinn, making pretty clear that this is in territory now that no one has seen before. Before we let you go, Quinn, I'm just curious, given your reporting the past few days down at the Texas border, what are people there saying about this debate? Is there a sense of urgency there that we feel and sense in the media echo chamber that all of us in social media participate in? What's the sense there on the ground about the severity of the situation right now?
There's certainly a sense of urgency among the immigrant advocate communities. The lawyers that I spoke to are all very concerned, particularly about getting access to their clients when they're sent across the border. It's not easy to traverse this border. People do it all the time, but it does. There is a lot of traffic. There are slowdowns. Customs and Border Protection has had to divert resources away from ports of entry to handle the big flows of migrants crossing between ports, crossing illegally, and that has caused slowdowns as well. So having to reach out and keep in contact with your clients when they've been sent back to Mexico is not something that these lawyers want to do, and it's something that makes proving their case for asylum much more difficult.
Yeah, it's such an interesting and important perspective that those asylum seekers face new challenges, legal challenges, even when they're back in Mexico. Quinn Owen, terrific reporting. Thank you so much down from the Texas border. Turning now to the race for 2020. After a short lull after the 4th of July holiday, the candidates are out barnstorming the early states today. Our team is fanned out in coverage of all of them, including tracking some new developments from some of the candidates looking to reboot their campaigns. Let's bring in Chris Donato now. He covers the Biden campaign. He's with us in New York. Also joined by Beatrice Peterson, who covers Kamala Harris, and Avery Harper is on a bus tour today with Kirsten Gillibrand, headed through, I think, Pennsylvania. So we'll check in with Avery in just a second. Chris, want to start with you because former Vice President Biden, looking to turn the page away from the controversy over busing, has just given a significant landmark speech on foreign policy. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Devin, he just gave a speech about 45 minutes long, laying the groundwork for what his foreign policy would be under a Biden administration. It was a good way for him to turn the page, as you said, away from all the negative attention over his comments about busing and his comments about working with segregationist senators. He gave a lot of things. He spent most of the speech talking about how he would undo things that are or actions that are going on under the Trump administration, such as getting rid of the Muslim ban or ending family separation at the border, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, which he got a huge round of applause for.
Yeah, and it's certainly something he dominates his peers on. He has more experience than any of them in foreign policy. But I guess, Chris, there's some criticism of Biden that he is simply reverting back to what President Obama's foreign policy was. How is his team countering that this is more than just a switchback to the Obama days?
Well, he said that he would lay the groundwork from the Obama days, but it would have to go further. You know, he wants, within his first year of office, he said he would bring democracies from around the world to the table and figure out how they can go further from what we've seen over the 8 years under the Obama administration.
Yeah, build on some of those alliances, if you will, that were a hallmark of the Obama years. Chris, thanks for that. Let's turn now to Beatrice Peterson and Kamala Harris, who has, of course, been sparring with Joe Biden. She was on the Breakfast Club this morning. She was talking Joe Biden. Let's take a look.
I'm not going to let us engage on a debate stage for who's going to be the next president of the United States. I'm not going to allow us to engage in revisionist history. And I will tell you also, after I said that, I cannot tell you the number of men and women who have said to me, I was that girl, I was that boy. And I can't stand on that stage and allow certain conversations to be taking place. Because remember, I didn't bring this conversation up about these segregationists. That had been going on for weeks.
Beatrice, she's not dropping this.
No, the interview was about roughly a little bit under an hour, and she talked about the subject at length. You'll have to check it out tomorrow at 7 a.m. when it airs live, but it was very interesting. I mean, she mentioned the vice president at length and how it was kind of becoming something a little bit personal, it seems. It's very interesting. It's not something that's going away. I was with her last night in Brooklyn at her fundraiser at the Brooklyn Bowl, and there several attendees, including the DJ, had a picture of a young Kamala Harris that she's been using as post-debate, something that's become kind of a mainstay on the campaign trail.
And she's also trying to step up her policy proposal. She's been criticized for not having enough specifics out there. She's trying to put some more forward to get some momentum. And she just released a plan, tell us about it, on rape kit backlogs, that she would address that in her first year in office.
Yeah, she just put it out today. I mean, she's put out a number of other policy proposals this week as well. She has a joint policy proposal with AOC. So it's interesting. I mean, Senator Harris is really beefing up the policy. You'll have to check out the interview tomorrow, but she did have a very interesting jab at Elizabeth Warren on her policy proposals as well, saying that she puts out very specific policy proposals, not just general policies.
Yeah, she's fighting back, trying to get out from under that criticism. Beatrice, thank you. Let's go now to the campaign bus show with Avery Harper. She's on the road with Kirsten Gillibrand, headed to Cleveland. Got it wrong earlier. She's on the way to Cleveland. There's Avery. So, Avery, tell us what this is all about. Gillibrand has really struggled in the polls, and she's looking to jumpstart things with this tour and a new TV ad.
Well, when you speak with her and when you speak with her campaign, she says it's bigger than that. She says she wants to come to people where they are. She wants to talk about the issues that matter to them. This is a 2-day, 3-state tour called the Trump Broken Promises Tour. We're going to places that Trump won in 2016, and we're speaking to issues that the Gillibrand campaign says have been left unfulfilled by the Trump administration. So when we were in Pittsburgh, we were talking about pharmaceutical companies and the rising cost of health care and drugs. In Youngstown, Ohio, we were talking about the outsourcing of labor and layoffs. And right now, we're actually going to make a pit stop before we get to Cleveland. We're going to a tire factory that was owned by one of the attendees of the Youngstown Roundtable. So that's what it's really about. It's about speaking to specific issues and drawing a contrast between Senator Gillibrand and Donald Trump.
And she's certainly trying to capitalize on some of those rural voters in those areas which are so critical for Democrats to win in the election. Avery Harper, thank you so much. Our Kirsten Gillibrand reporter, among others, on the road with her. Thank you, Avery. We'll be back with you. Thanks for joining us here in the briefing room on this Thursday. You can catch us every day, 3:30 Eastern Time, right here on ABC News Live. Download the ABC News app if you don't have it. Easy way to follow us and track all the latest breaking news. Just push the live button down at the bottom. Of course, we're also on Hulu, Roku, Apple TV, Facebook Watch, all those places if you're at home surfing around. Hope to see you tomorrow.